Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Yacht Crew Vlogs right here on Yachting International Radio. My name is Rhea. I am your host, and today I'm really pleased to introduce the entire crew, I guess, of the sailing yacht Ruby Rose. How are you, Nick and Terysa?
Really well, thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, nice to see you, Rhea. Thanks for having us on your show.
Well, you know what? I'm kind of surprised because you're sitting in what obviously isn't a boat, and you should be on a boat.
Don't we know it? Yeah, look, 2020 has kind of thrown the world into a little bit of a tailspin. The short answer is we sold our boat and we're waiting for our new boat. So in the interim, we're hiding from nasty viruses on a Greek island, which is probably the safest place in the world to be. Yeah, it could be a lot worse.
I wouldn't mind hiding in a safe place on a Greek island, that's for sure. So let's go back to the beginning of the journey. I did read one of the first blogs that you wrote, Terysa, about how you and Nick met.
Right, okay, yes, that is going back, isn't it? All right, so we met 11 years ago. We met traveling. So that was from the get-go, one thing that we very much had in common, this kind of love for travel and a bit of adventure and kind of exploring other cultures and getting outside of our comfort zone, I guess, because we met in India, traveling in India. And I guess that was a relatively challenging area to travel. We were on a tour, but it was still very much a culture shock, I guess. So, and we both loved it. It was right up our alley. We loved that kind of traveling. So we really bonded over that, I guess. And then it didn't take long and we decided that we were going to try and make it work, despite the fact that I am Australian. I was living in Australia at the time and Nick was living in London at the time. So I got all my visa sorted out and everything, and I moved to London about 6 or 7 months later. And Nick kind of said to me, look, sailing is my passion, sailing is my hobby. I sail every weekend, I have a boat, and essentially I spend my entire weekends on my boat, either sailing or working on it or drinking down the pub with my mates talking about sailing. So if you want to spend, time with me outside of being at home, I guess, then yeah, you better get into it. So he introduced me to the hobby of sailing, and yeah, I don't know whether I fell in love with it straight away, because we were situated on the east coast of England, and the weather, even in the middle of summer, as any English person listening to this will know, is not always fantastic. And so it was very rare that we got those beautiful sunny days with, just a light wind kind of, that didn't happen very often at all. And so it was always a bit of a challenge, but we got there. And I did fall in love with it eventually. I kind of saw that there was potential there for something a little bit more comfortable. And I think what we both really fell in love with was the potential for a lifestyle change, so that we could take our home almost anywhere in the world, and still kind of sleep in our own bed every night and have all our possessions with us and have that kind of level of comfort and convenience, but still get to see the world. So yeah, that was really exciting to us. So that's kind of how we got into the idea of being a liveaboard.
Well, I mean, it's quite an experience, I can imagine. I've been watching, and I would encourage everybody to head on over to YouTube. If you haven't yet subscribed, definitely head on over to Sailing Yacht Ruby Rose. Subscribe, because they have at least one video a week, or one thing a week, correct?
Yeah, yep. One video a week. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and so you're always keeping up. You've got 125,000 subscribers now over there. Right.
Yeah, that was a pretty big surprise for us. We never thought anyone would watch what we did. I think, we kind of, I know that everyone on YouTube says this, but like, we did start off just to make videos for our friends and family. And also because we set off in fact, I think it was 5 years ago today, we did our first Atlantic crossing.
Yeah.
And we didn't video for the first 2 years because we didn't think anyone was interested. And it got to a point we were sat in the BVIs and there was just something missing. We both came from like pretty full-on jobs. And there's only so much rum punch you can drink sat on a boat before eventually you're like, all right, there's something missing. My brain is turning to mush. And that's where the whole video thing started.
Yeah.
So when did you start noticing that people were starting to pay attention to what you were doing, and maybe you should take a little bit more time and really, concentrate on it?
Well, we were in the Bahamas actually, and we were just putting out these weekly videos that really didn't take long at all to put together. I mean, it was very, very basic. And I was having a look around, and we were getting a little bit of a bit of a following. We were getting comments saying people were enjoying our videos, and I thought that was quite cool. And we were getting some subscribers, and that was really fun. And then I said to Nick, you know what? Why don't we just do something a bit different? We're in the Bahamas. It's such a beautiful setting, and why don't we talk about something that we think people are interested in? Because we were getting comments about lots of questions, people asking a lot of questions, and there was one theme that was coming up a lot, which was, how much does this all cost? So I said, why don't we make a video about how much it costs? Because people are asking that question, and maybe that's interesting to people. And so I think that was the first time that we'd ever planned what we're going to do and actually put any effort into the video, because before that it was just kind of walking around with a camera and just putting it all together. So we kind of put a little bit of effort in, and we kind of put a little bit of a script together and kind of worked out the entire episode in advance, and then we sat down and we filmed it. We waited for a really lovely day, we sat outside, we filmed it all. I put a lot of effort into the editing, although I look back on that video now and I think, oh my god, it was really amateurish, but at the time I was really proud of what I did. And I pressed publish, and the video just was really, really popular. And within, I think, a couple of weeks, we gained something like 10,000 extra subscribers. And, it was really, I think it really boosted our channel, and it got us a lot of attention at that kind of early stage. So we got a lot of momentum early on from that video. And as soon as we realized that if we were putting out content that people were genuinely interested in, then A, it would help our channel, of course, but B, that was really satisfying to be putting out information that was genuinely useful to people, not just filming us having a drink or going for a swim or sailing along, but actually enabling people to, perhaps start to think about making a lifestyle change themselves. So that got us quite excited. And at that point, I guess we saw the potential for a YouTube channel that was not only, inspirational because people were watching the videos and thinking, oh, that looks like a really great lifestyle, maybe I should do that as well. But also, as I said, genuinely informative. And I think that's been our ethos ever since. We're happy to provide inspiration, and we're happy to provide entertainment. But we really want to, at the end of the day, give people the tools and the information that they need to perhaps start on that journey of making this change for themselves, if that's what they want to do.
Well, that is something that you see quite often. I am on a lot of sailing sites across social media, and you come from, you get some people looking to live aboard, and some of their comments are like, okay, you are taking a little bit over the top. You don't have to be that, worried. And then there's others that think you could just buy the boat, jump on board, and off you go. And it's a world in between. I mean, it literally is, from one end to the other. Have you found that there are people out there that are completely unprepared that decide that they want to take that journey?
We've sailed now through 3 continents, and we've met cruisers across all 3. And there's a commonality between every place we traveled in. The cruisers we meet tend to fall into distinct bands. There's those that are planning and they're going to get across the line. And you can, within 5 minutes of them telling you they're going to do it, they're going to do it. The other side of the coin is that there are cruisers that tell you they're going to do it, and that they're never going to do it. For us, I think one thing that is huge is there's a mindset. And, we found this in the UK. We found it when we were living in Charleston. People that have bought a boat, and in a few years' time, they're going to go, but they're going to go once they've done this job and that job, and the jobs never come to an end. And I think from my perspective, they want to buy into the dream, but they will never actually get over the line. And it's common. And we say this because, Terysa, absolutely, our channel is all about enabling people and getting people to understand how they can get across the line and get sailing. And the biggest obstacle that people normally will come across after finances and health is themselves. That's what the obstacle is. And I know this because I had the same. We had the same. We had perfectly good careers. We could have, worked for another 10 years and been pretty well off and lived our life in London really without risks or without, having to ever think about, struggling financially. but we opted to go, no. We are gonna go and risk, you know, being like absolutely penniless at the end of it, in pursuit of happiness, which is a massive, you know, it's a huge thing for Americans. And it kept me awake at night. You literally, I was lying awake thinking, you're a fool, you're an absolute idiot. Why are you giving up so much and taking such a risk? And the obstacle is, you've got to, you know, you have to give yourself a stern talking to, which is a lovely English expression, you know, and say, you know, no, you're going to do this. And the only way I could manage it psychologically really was to set a timeline and to have goals that we had to achieve. So take the whole project of going from having stable careers and a plan to going sailing, and breaking that down into arbitrarily 10 or 12 manageable parts, and working towards each of those goals individually, rather than going, well, this is how we're going to do it.
One thing I wanted to know is, how does that affect a relationship living on board? Because, you know, in yachting, we hear a lot about mental health of crew when strangers are placed in the same cabins, et cetera, et cetera. But is it a different dynamic completely when it is a relatively small boat? I mean, your sailboat, it wasn't huge, but it's just the two of you, and especially doing something like an Atlantic crossing. How does that affect you as a couple, and how does that affect your mental health?
Do you want to go first on this, and I'll go second?
Yeah, we both have thoughts, many thoughts about this. I'm glad that you brought that up, because it's not a subject that in all the interviews that we do, we get asked very often at all. And it's not a subject that we get asked about in our videos. We don't get emails about this, but really this is one of the most important things that I think most cruisers should be talking about, because we are, I think, an excellent example of how you can have a fantastic relationship where, you know, we've got a very healthy relationship, and yet still come up against these kinds of issues, and they genuinely can affect your happiness and how long you can kind of sustain this lifestyle. So we, I think, had quite a typical relationship when we were living in London. We had very busy separate lives. We, you know, worked separately. We had separate groups of friends, but when we did spend time together, you know, it was really good quality time. And then suddenly we go from that environment to living, as you say, on a relatively small boat, and being together 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Not only that, but also taking on different roles in the relationship. So before, you know, when we were living in London, we would both have quite, I don't know, very similar roles around the house, for example, like domestically, you know, we'd both cook, we'd both clean, we'd both do the laundry, that kind of thing. And suddenly we're living on the boat, and Nick, because I had never really taken an interest in learning how to do any kind of boat maintenance, Nick had all this boat maintenance to do, all these boat jobs to do, not to mention the responsibility of being a skipper, which I think we'll talk about in a minute. And my contribution to our lifestyle essentially came down to the really boring, mundane domestic jobs, keeping everything clean, doing all the washing, doing all the laundry, that kind of thing, which I'd never really seen myself in that role before, ever. I mean, Nick will be the first to attest, like, I'm terrible domestically. Like, I shrunk his cardigan the other day in the wash, like, I'm really bad. But suddenly it was the only way that I could contribute, and that was a real source of frustration for me. And I remember we had quite a lot of very heated discussions about me saying, look, you know, you've got to do the dishes, you've got to do the cooking, you've got to do this. And Nick would turn around and be like, I've been working all day on the boat, and you've been sitting there like on the internet or reading a book. And it kind of was a really weird space for us both to be in. I think it was really, I don't know, it was just a real adjustment, because he was quite correct. Like, he's, you know, kind of elbow deep in grease all day, and I'm sitting there kind of, you know, on the phone or reading my book or whatever. Naturally, you know, the way that I could contribute to the running of the boat would be to keep everything clean and tidy, but it was just still it was a very difficult adjustment for both of us. And we've since kind of worked out something a little bit more that suits us both a little bit better. And of course, now we have, you know, full-time jobs in terms of the YouTube channel. So that is very much an equal partnership. But yeah, it was a real adjustment. And I think, yeah, I'll let Nick talk now because there was another strand to all of this as well.
So that was, Teresa's absolutely correct that, going from having a conventional and very good and open we communicate pretty well. We used to communicate well. I think we communicate a lot better now, but we had to go through a couple of major shifts in our relationship to get to where we are now. And I would say that if I thought our relationship was good then, it is even better now. And I know that's a bit schmaltzy, but it is. So the two things that happened, yes, we moved onto a boat and we went from, in some case, seeing each other. We'd see each other for 2 hours a day sometimes. There was a time when we were living in London where Terysa was doing night shifts, working on as a medical helpline for people from the emergency services. So she'd get into bed at like 4 a.m. some mornings. I'd get up at 6 a.m. to go to work and I'd get back at 9 p.m. So we never saw each other. So the time that we got together was just at weekends. And then you try and cram all this stuff into weekends, because if you don't spend time together, you grow apart. That's just a given. And it happens to people, people that, veterans, people in the military or people that work, away from home. So you do have to work harder to keep your relationship together. And we went from this to being with each other 24 hours a day on a 12 meter boat. So there is a huge amount of adaptation. You have to adapt, and that comes in different forms. Teresa's correct. It is called pink and blue jobs. People, traditional female roles and traditional male roles. And that's wrong. I'm not suggesting that is any way right. But when I had, essentially a 5 to 6 year head start on how to do certain things like unblock a toilet or fix an alternator, if the alternator or the toilet go wrong, I can either just get on and fix it or instruct Terysa how to do it. And then the job doesn't get done as fast because I've then got to go into explanation. So it is easier to fall into these roles. And I'm not going to say gender roles. It's the roles that you are more suited to. And now, for instance, Terysa is a far better editor than I am. So she has skill sets that are far in excess of mine. And it's often easier just to do the job that you're best at. So that took a lot of, that took change. And then we moved on to the fact that generally we only ever saw each other. And if you look, you watch all these daytime talk shows, they say spending 24 hours together is never good for a relationship. But we didn't get a choice. So you have to learn to vent your frustrations in different ways. You have to learn to talk. You have to learn to kind of not get yourself into a situation where you have arguments that can't be resolved. And honestly, we found, and I'm sure Terysa will touch on this again, when we met up with other cruising couples, so often, and it tended to be the man in the relationship would not give the woman the choices that she used to have in what she did, where she went. And it kind of almost went back to the 1950s where there was this kind of strange disconnect between modern relationships and where you were on a boat. And Terysa would find so many women on boats would get off and go, God, I need to get away from my husband, or God, he won't listen to me, or he's telling me we're doing this. And it became pretty...
Well, yeah, it did. There's definitely a theme. But also I think that, yeah, I don't know. It's a weird one because you have to define your role within the context of living on a boat. So your role within the context of living in a house and going to work every day, usually kind of couples fall into those roles fairly naturally. But suddenly you take them out of that environment, you plonk them in a different environment entirely. One of them is usually less experienced, although certainly I would, if anyone's listening to this and wondering how to kind of get over this, I would say learn together, because lots of couples that we met who started together, learned together, they were, far more at ease on the boat together and far happier in that respect than couples where there was like some kind of, where it was uneven, like in our situation. But I would say that, I think that we tackled it fairly well, because there were things that Nick had always done in terms of sailing and boat maintenance and living on the boat that he wasn't actually as well suited to as I was. I just didn't know it at the time. So, as time goes on, you do start to realize, actually, I can do that just as well, if not better than you. So I'll take that on. or whatever, or vice versa. So there are certain aspects of not our jobs, but certainly our life on board that I have been able to kind of have a little bit more autonomy over. For example, like navigation and planning and that kind of thing. Like Nick is hilarious because, you know, we'll be sitting in an anchorage, let's say in the Caribbean somewhere, and, you know, we've got friends around sitting in the cockpit, and the skipper, which is almost always the male, will turn to Nick and say, so where are you going to next? And which way are you going to go, like around the leeward side or the windward side of that island? And are you going to, you know, what are you thinking about with the winds? Because you need to do this and you need to do that. And Nick would be sitting there, blank face, and he'd look at me.
Stoned, put my DD down and go, all right, babe, where are we off to?
Yeah, but Nick would have no idea. So I'd be like, well, actually, what I think that we'll do is X, Y, and Z. But it's always an interesting assumption that, yeah, Nick is, and he is the skipper, obviously, very much so. But yeah, I think that the roles on board have evolved over time.
I mean, my mother is a staunch feminist, and so we were brought up with a very, very matriarchal household. I had a very strong-willed grandmother, a very strong-willed mother, and my father worked away a lot. So we were brought up with that mindset. So the kind of this inadvertent sexism would never have been tolerated. So I think that probably had a lot to do with, you know, how we didn't go into this living on a boat with a kind of sexist attitude, even if it was inadvertent. The other thing that you mentioned is mental health on a boat. And kind of, I started by saying that when we first set off, there was this adaptation process that we had to go through to get ourselves into a position where it was working well for our relationship and, you know, different roles. Fast forward, I think 2 years, and we were sat in the BVIs. And the BVIs was a fantastic place for us to sail. We ended up with a huge group of young cruisers, 5 or 6 different boats, couples in their 30s and 40s. And every night we'd get together on the beach, we'd have a barbecue, there were a couple of guitar players, you know, there was beer, it was the idyll that you would, if you were to, you know, write the postcard, you know, take the photograph, this was it was perfect. The location was perfect. Our friends were perfect. Everything was, there was nothing on a checklist that wasn't exactly what it should have been and exactly what I would have wanted when we set off. But I was so unhappy and there was something not quite right. And I remember saying to Terysa, what is wrong? Like, I'm not happy. And there's nothing wrong on paper. And I had to take a really good, hard look at myself. And we went from the BVIs through the Bahamas and we got up to Charleston in South Carolina. We followed another boat up. And it got to the point where I kind of almost gave up the sailing. I was very, very unhappy. And I had to reflect pretty hard on what was going on. Like, why was I so unhappy when I was living the dream? I'd done what I always wanted to do. It was working out. The YouTube channel was going really well at the time, but yet inside I'm still torn up. And after a lot of soul searching and leaving the boat for 3 months, I got to the point where I didn't want to be on the boat anymore. The conclusion I came to was that still Terysa and I weren't communicating properly. And just to elaborate on that, I think from my point of view, I took on a hell of a lot of responsibility. Being a skipper weighs really heavily on your shoulders. It does. But only because the crew was Terysa. Now, you could firstly think, well, actually, you're being sexist again. You're just saying that she's not able. She's perfectly able. But the responsibility for another human being weighed hugely and still weighs on me, or heavily on my shoulders. If I had another crew of friends or paid crew, it wouldn't be so intense. If I was solo sailing, I'd be completely okay. Like, I'm pretty okay being on my own on a boat because the only person I'm responsible for is me. But I have a responsibility to Terysa and by extension her family, to keep her safe. And that is something that I struggle with. That's the first thing. The second point about this is that she assumed I was okay. And I thought that she didn't want to hear that I wasn't okay. So it's kind of like this putting a brave face on it. And neither of us voiced this to each other. I think Terysa, and step in if I've got this wrong, thought that I was okay going at the pace that we were going at, because the faster you go, the more stressful it is, you know, and you can take this to any level. And the slower you go, the more chance you've got to breathe, to fix the boat, to kind of not throw yourself into passages or passage planning that can be exhausting. And it came down to the fact that we just thought, we're going too fast. Like, this is what it is. We had done, in our first 2 seasons, we went from England through Spain, through Morocco, the Canary Islands, an Atlantic crossing, down to down to Grenada, up to Antigua, hurricane season, then into, you know, the BVIs, the Bahamas, up to America. And we were meant to be going to New York. And in the end, we're like, just enough. This is just, it's the expression we have in English, it's doing my head in. Like, literally, I'm not happy, and we just need to slow down. And I think once we had this conversation and we sat, and I said, look, I can't deal with this anymore. We're going too fast and we're going too hard. And Terysa said, I never thought, you know, I thought that's the pace you wanted to have. I thought I was planning things that were, you know, exciting for us, that you were enjoying. And it got to the point where I'm like, well, I don't have time to enjoy it, because every time we get to a port, I've got to fix stuff and plan stuff and recuperate before we head off again. And that was like a kind of light bulb moment for me, where I'm like, actually, there's nothing wrong at all. We just need to communicate better. And that comes from a place where we've been living on a boat together for almost 2 years. And I thought that our communication was better than just about, I'd have taken the Pepsi challenge against most couples for our ability to communicate. But that took it to another level.
Yeah.
That is a very good story, because, you know, I think a lot of people don't actually really think about that aspect. They think about the provisioning. They think about how they're going to finance it. They think about what type of boat they should have and the routes, as you were saying. But nobody actually thinks how it's going to affect not only their relationship, but as well their mental health. And that is huge, because if you as people, we're told this just in daily life, if we're not looking after ourselves, we can't do anything. Literally, we can't do anything. And this goes, I mean, especially on a sailboat in the middle of the ocean, just the two of you. If you're not okay here, it's going to be very, very difficult to make sure that the only thing keeping you safe is in good order.
Yeah, I think it's not just about your mental health and whether or not you're safe, and it's also about whether you're enjoying it. It should be fun. And that's the thing that, you know, it got to a point where it wasn't fun anymore. And you have to then go through the mental checklist and think, well, what is it? Because we've got everything. We've literally got the world at our feet. Why is it not fun? And it takes a lot of reflection. And, you know, without sounding like some beaten up old hippie, it is a journey, metaphorically, where you do find yourself and you start to understand more about yourself and about your limits. And really, everyone has mental limits, and that is not just where you're pushed to a point where, you know, you can't cope mentally anymore. But I think that's the thing. It creeps up on you slowly. You take less enjoyment from something than you should do. And it's an incremental change where you start by thinking, well, I should have enjoyed that more, and I'll let that pass. But then every time it becomes less enjoyable, and you start to take less enjoyment for things. Eventually there comes a point where you think, actually, yeah, I've let this go on for too long. Now, hopefully, if it was to happen again, and it probably will, I will notice the symptoms earlier. And that, I think, is probably over everything I have learned in the last 6 years of being away, whether it's how to do an ice splice, which I still can't do, by the way, you know, especially in Dyneema, you know, whether it's an ice splice or fixing a sail or understanding currents or weather. The most important lesson I've learned is this, that you have to listen to the changes in your kind of inner voice to work out whether or not you're happy.
Well, let's head on to something else that I wanted to question you guys about. What is the average age, would you think, of most of the people that are cruising around the world nowadays? I mean, in the past, it seemed almost like, you know, once you were finished with your New York tower or, you know, your high-flying London job and you were ready to retire, you and the wife would go sail off into the sunset. Literally, it's a saying. Is that the average age that are cruising nowadays out around the world, or has it changed?
I think to tell you the truth, it seems to be geographic. We came from Europe in 2015. We left for the Atlantic, and we found that the Windward Islands, most of the kind of like from the Windward Island Caribbean, they were older retirees, so 50s and 60s, children left home, given up their jobs. I mean, most of the couples we were with were between, say, 55 and 65. That seemed to be the golden age. There were a lot of kid boats, so people in their 30s and 40s with children, but the majority of cruisers we found were in that, for coming across doing Atlantic crossing, which is kind of a more serious job than, just doing day sailing. They would tend to be older people with more expensive boats, not exclusively, but generally. When we got to the Leeward Islands, which tends to be an area which is far more accessible for East Coast America, the crews were a lot younger with cheaper boats because it's easier sailing. You can day sail essentially from Florida all the way to the BVIs. And so for them, it would tended to be people on a year or two sabbatical. They were taking a year or two off before they had kids, before they did this. And that was a different dynamic. But also, I know we touched on this pre-interview, the whole market is changing. The whole world of sailing is changing, and wealth is being redistributed to far younger cohorts than maybe 20 years ago. So whereas, 20 years ago, when we bought our Southerly, the Ruby Rose One, it's a hand-built British boat, and we had to take loan after loan after loan to afford this boat because we knew it was right for us. But they were cruelly termed inheritance boats because you only bought one when your parents died, and you used your inheritance money to buy the boat. So it was seen as a kind of a boat for on average, 50 to 60-year-olds. Because that's when they came into money, or they sold their companies or whatever. But since then, we have found so many people in their 30s and 40s that have just made their money early and gone early, and are now, or were in a situation where they could buy pretty expensive yachts to go sailing. I mean, we met one couple in the BVIs who he was the Portuguese couple who we're not going to mention because they didn't want ever to be filmed because of what they were doing. I mean, he was hysterical. I think his boat was worth 12 million.
It was absurd.
Absurd motor yacht. And he sold it to buy another one, which I think was even bigger. It was like a 60-foot Sunseeker. Damn thing was beautiful, like electric roof. I mean, incredible. He must have been mid-30s. And he worked through Skype with his office in Portugal. And he had one office in Switzerland, one office in Portugal, and one office somewhere else. And he always used to tell one office it was in the other office. So no one ever knew that he was on a yacht in the BVIs. And like he was just very indicative of couples that we've met that made their money early and had they were really making their way in the whole sailing market, whether it's commercially or otherwise. So yeah, I think that the world is changing, and especially now on the East Coast of America and that whole area, the average age is dropped a lot.
Yeah, and I also think that it's not just about making a lot of money early and then, going off and going cruising. It's also about being able to work remotely. And so with, this kind of skill set that's coming up, a lot of people are getting into these jobs that allow them to work remotely, particularly, obviously, things have accelerated in the last 12 months, but even pre-COVID, it was kind of very much going in that direction. So you would get, I don't know, like anything from these are people that we've met, teachers who taught English online to Chinese students, to, software engineers who could work from anywhere in the world, to, whatever else, people like us who actually are content creators. And there's a lot of different types of content creators out there, people who did writing or whatever. So there's a lot of opportunity, and it's going to just increase. This trend is obviously going to just continue to work remotely. And if you're working remotely and you're earning a good income, then, which is very, very possible now, and you've got fast internet, which again is becoming increasingly available, then you don't need to kind of work for 10 years, save up all your money, and then buy a boat and then live off your savings. You can just do it all at the same time, and maybe take out a loan for your boat if you can get a marine mortgage or whatever, and pay your boat off in the same way that you would a mortgage on your house. So there's a lot more opportunity now for younger people to be going out sailing, and we're seeing that for sure across, you know, the kind of demographic amongst cruisers. And I would also say that there's a little bit of it kind of depends on the different attitude to sailing within different countries. So for example, I would say that historically, and I like to think this is changing a little bit, English couples, as Nick said, tend to be older. They tend to be the retired couple. We've met recently a lot of young English couples with children who are, you know, going off and doing this. So I do think things are changing. But for example, when we were doing our Atlantic crossing, the number of Scandinavian families on the Atlantic crossing was huge. So the Scandinavians, they're, you know, they're clever. They don't wait for retirement. They bundle their kids up, pop them on the boat, and off they go. So there's different attitudes across different kind of parts of the world. And
I think all the kids on the Ark were Scandinavian.
Yeah, they're all these like blonde little kids running around. When
they did the prize giving for the Atlantic crossing, they actually brought all the kids up on stage to give them awards, and that 100% of them were little blondes. They're all little blonde kids. So yeah, the attitudes are changing, and the age is changing. And I'd like to think that we, because we've got a YouTube channel and show, as many YouTube channels do, doing it at a young age, that people are starting to be inspired.
Yeah.
And I think one final point I want to make is that I hope and believe that COVID is going to change things, and things like Starlink are going to change the world when they get it onto a boat where you can get high-speed internet anywhere in the world at affordable prices. And that, you know, if at some point Elon Musk gives me a phone call, I would love to pioneer getting Starlink on it, because that is going to change the world. Just being able to work remotely and leave earlier. And honestly, the younger couples that we have met seem far, far happier than the older ones.
Let me ask you something that is near and dear to my heart, the environment, sustainability. How does that apply to you when living on board?
It's a brilliant question. And we had a really good discussion with our friends over at Sailing Uma. So I'm going to talk to you about environment pre, peri, and post. So what happens, because the first thing you're going to get pre is, well, hang on, you bought a plastic boat. Plastic's not good for the environment. Why are you sailing? Why are you championing environmental causes if you're floating around in a big bit of plastic? The answer that they give, because they're architects, is they say, and it's a brilliant answer, there's nothing wrong with plastic as long as you don't have to recycle it or put it into landfill. Plastic will last for 50, 100 years. So having a plastic boat that doesn't degrade, doesn't put things into the water, there's nothing wrong with that. So floating around in a plastic boat, as long as you're not scrapping it like straws or bottles, there's nothing wrong with that. As we move on, the environment, so as we continue our sailing, the way I look at it is our new boat is being designed with as many environmental features as we can integrate that we see a need for. And we look for that in the actual construction of a boat in, firstly, renewable energy. That's a given. You know, most people now accept that using good efficiency, high efficiency solar panels, not relying on diesel as much as you need to, and using things like hydro generators to generate electricity when you're sailing are a good way of powering a boat without relying on fossil fuels. In addition to that, you've got other features, for instance, that I did a project on environmental recycling, and what are barriers to recycling and why people don't recycle more. And the biggest barrier is that it's too much of a hassle to recycle. Like, it's easier to just not recycle. In some places like California, it's a big thing, but in developing countries and alike, there's no impetus to recycle.
Well, Greece is a good example. Yeah. We're in Greece at the moment, and there is no recycling infrastructure here, unfortunately, and there doesn't seem to be any awareness about the harm that single-use plastics can do. You can't go to the supermarket without them insisting that you package all your vegetables up in separate little plastic bags, so that they can put a sticker on. And if you get there with plastic bags already there, or you want to put multiple things into one bag, they look at you like you're crazy. And we've actually encountered that quite a bit in Europe, unfortunately. So I think that it's there's a kind of cultural and more like governmental issues at play here as well.
So within our new boat we've designed with certain features that, for instance, we have 2 chutes in the galley. One chute communicates directly with the sea, and that is for when we're offshore, for us to be able to put organic matter over the side, to separation of the produce that we use. So organic matter, so potato peelings or whatever, go down one chute. Also having a separate chute into a recycling bin, because we have to keep all our plastics with us, and put them into, recycle them as appropriate as we can. So from an environmental point of view, while we're sailing, that's how we work. Looking to the future and how things are going to change, I hope that with the increase in battery efficiency and battery technology, you are going to, within hopefully 10 years, be able to sustain electric propulsion on boats for long-term cruising. You can do it now, but you've only got like a 40 to 50 mile range realistically. But as that technology increases, you are going to find far more sustainable sources of energy for all aspects of sailing.
Let me ask you, you started off, the first Ruby Rose was a classic sailboat, and now you've decided to head towards the catamaran route. Why is that?
Do you want to answer this? Or
yeah, well, it was a bit of a journey, I guess, going from being really, really happy on our monohull and not imagining that we would ever need or want anything else, to deciding to actually go for a catamaran and a 45-foot catamaran as well. It's not a small catamaran. So I think that once we started cruising and once we started doing these long passages, ocean crossings and longer offshore passages, and also just day sailing, we realized, first of all, that we weren't really getting the speed that we wanted to. So we could only average about 5.5 knots most of the time. And, that's quite respectable. But when you're talking about sailing all the time, then the speed really does come into it, because the less time you actually have to spend sailing, the more time you get to spend at your destination enjoying yourself. And sailing is exhausting. And we talked about how, the kind of continuously being on passage and moving was exhausting physically, but also mentally as well. So we kind of were looking at all these boats around us, all these big boats around us, catamarans as well as monohulls, sailing a lot faster than us and kind of reaping the benefits. So that was kind of the first clue, the first kind of thing that we thought, that maybe there is a better way. And so we started thinking about our future plans for sailing, and we looked at, we wanted to cross the Pacific, we wanted to go through Panama Canal, cross the Pacific, sail ideally to Australia, where I'm from. But we were starting to realize that was going to be far from impossible. It was very, very much within the realms of possibility, and it would be easy enough for us to do. But we realized that we would be spending a lot of time sailing and a much less time enjoying the destinations, because don't forget that these areas of the world, you can't just hang out at anchor indefinitely. There's cyclone seasons coming, there's hurricane seasons coming. So as chilled out as you want to be, you are always up against the clock, irrespective of how slow you try and go. So there is always that time pressure to get somewhere by a certain point. So we kind of started realizing that our boat, a 38-foot monohull, was not perfect for going through the Panama Canal and into the Pacific. And when we started looking at perhaps selling her and getting something bigger, we started looking, obviously, at every option on the table. And we realized that, we'd at this point been on board a lot of catamarans, friends of ours who invite us over for dinner or whatever. And it's just a whole new world when you're sitting on a catamaran. It's just amazing. And we just thought, wow, they've really got it sorted. This is just fantastic. So it really appealed to us, not just the extra space, but also, we loved, particularly in tropical climates where, we'd go down into our hull in the evening, that it gets dark, and we go down and have dinner and then, maybe watch something on television or whatever. And there was not much airflow, and it was always like down. You couldn't just kind of look around you and see what else was happening in the anchorage. And we both really loved the idea of spending our inside time up and being able to see around us and have, I guess, that connection to our surrounding environment. And also, you know, the more kind of practical everyday benefits that come with that, like increased ventilation and that kind of thing. Better visibility when you're sailing along. You can actually be inside and still, you know, see where it is that you're going and keep a good watch from inside, which you cannot do on a monohull or on most monohulls. So there are lots of different factors. And once we started going down that road, we started seeing all the benefits. Now, I wouldn't say that a catamaran is better than a monohull at all. But
Anchor it is.
I would, yeah, at anchor it's there's a lot of advantages, but not everything suits everyone. But what I would say is that we made the decision. We thought, you know what, if we have to change up, then why not make the change to a catamaran? You know, worst case scenario is we hate it. I did not think that would be the case, but we both thought, you know, we might as well change it up. You know, if we're going to have a different experience, a different cruising and sailing experience, we might as well, you know, try it out.
Go big or go home.
That's right. Go big or go home. And we didn't want anything too big because that just seemed ridiculous. But we realized that perhaps like the 40-foot catamarans might be a little bit restrictive in terms of hull speed, but also, you know, as Nick kind of, you know, implied, if you're going to do it, you've got to do it kind of properly. So we wanted something that was a bit bigger, a bit faster, you know, had that kind of internal volume. And obviously once we went down the route of research, we realized that performance was important to us. But performance comes at a price, not just financially, but also in terms of interior volume. So we had to go a little bit bigger in order to get that interior volume if we wanted a performance catamaran. So yeah, we ended up landing on a Seawind 1370, but it was a real journey to get there. It was, you know, several years, I guess,
Yeah,
in the making.
2 years, I think, and we're still not there. We've got another year till the boat's delivered. So
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So you guys are landlocked for another year.
Well, no, we don't have a boat. We have got lots of plans because we are going from monohulls to catamaran. And honestly, I want to get on the catamaran and know how to sail a catamaran, or at least have more idea than I do now. It's a different process. Yeah. You know, generally you feel a monohull. You know, you can feel the boat heels, so you have a better idea of how it sails. They point higher. They'll sail to wind far better. Catamarans, they don't heel, so you're doing everything by numbers. The sails are different, and so the plan is to learn to sail a catamaran or to sail catamarans in this time. You know, rather than sitting here twiddling my thumbs. You know, we'll continue educating ourselves. So over the next 12 months, we're going to charter some catamarans. We're going to learn the sailing characteristics of different boats, learn how they respond, and just so that we're not, you know, we've got no excuse apart from maybe COVID and not being out traveling internationally. So we reduce the number of excuses we have for getting on boat and saying, I don't know what I'm doing. I want to be able to get onto this new boat and at least have done the utmost to educate ourselves in a new set of processes.
So this takes me back then to the beginning of the interview when we were talking about the different roles that the two of you had and that you suggested that, you know, two people go and learn together. Will this be the case now with this catamaran, that both of you will be learning that knowledge at the same time, and maybe those traditional roles as they won't be so traditional anymore because you'll both have been sort of looking at a new project and learning together?
Well, this is one of the aspects that I'm looking forward to the most because it is, you know, a new start for both of us, and it's going to be a learning curve for both of us. And so I am really looking forward to us starting off kind of as equals and learning everything together and kind of gaining the same experience at the same time. I mean, inevitably, Nick will continue to do like the engine service.
No, actually, I know.
Let me just make one thing clear. I have no like desire to, you know, be servicing the toilets, or I don't mind getting my hands dirty, but there's certain jobs that I'm quite happy for Nick to retain. I'm just going to make that clear.
I mean, what I did say at the beginning of the interview is that sometimes if you're doing, say, engine maintenance, if Terysa has absolutely no experience in it, then I have to explain it to her if she wants to do it. Yeah. While we are chartering boats and when we are learning this new boat, there is no reason why she shouldn't be doing all the work under tutelage. I mean, you know, when I was at university, they always used to say, tell, show, do. You tell someone how to do it, you show them how to do it, then you let them do it themselves. And this is a pretty good opportunity for, you know, Terysa to learn these processes in exactly that method. You know, if it's changing an alternator belt, you know, you tell her how to do it, show her to do it, and let her do it herself. And so we have the time to get this done. And tying it neatly into something else I said about responsibility and how I feel responsible for her, the more she knows and the more capable she is of doing things that she has not as much experience as I do, the easier it's going to be for me. So this is self-serving. If it gets to a point in, say, 2 years where there is nothing that she can't do as well, or if not better than I can, then essentially I'm going to feel far less pressure, because I know that if I'm knocked out by the boom, or if I've got dengue fever and I can't do anything, and she has to change an alternator, change an impeller, diagnose an engine problem, do some fiberglass repair, and then, you know, I'm literally, I will feel so much better about it. So it's a worthwhile process. And I do encourage any couple that are planning on doing this in the long term to try and work out where gaps in your knowledge are and fill them.
Well, Terysa, it looks like you're going to be getting your elbows greasy after all.
Right.
I'm not unblocking that toilet again.
I like how you started that section off saying there's no way, and then by the end you can't refuse, can you?
Yeah, I think Nick has different ideas. Nick and I have, we might need to have a quick conversation at some point.
Off camera.
Well, you guys, you know what? This has been absolutely really fascinating for me. It is the first time that I've ever had the chance to interview somebody who lives aboard. And I don't know why. It just hasn't come across. I think because they're busy living aboard. They don't have time to talk to people from Yachting International Radio, perhaps. I don't know.
Yeah, well, you know, we have the opportunity now. This is convenient for us because we are, as Nick said, you know, a little bit in limbo. So this is a great chance for us to kind of reach out and connect with other people. So, because you're right, living on a boat is pretty all-consuming, particularly if you're running or if you're working full-time in any capacity at the same time. So yeah, we're glad to kind of have the opportunity to do stuff like this.
Well, you know what? You'll have to keep in touch with us. And you know, I'd love to follow your journey. Of course, I will be following via YouTube. Everyone, head over to their YouTube account and subscribe. Sailing Yacht Ruby Rose. And another year until you're on your catamaran and back out on adventures anew.
Yep, absolutely. But we'll be doing, as Nick said, you know, there's a lot of catamaran sailing to be done between now and then. We obviously are, you know, in Greece at the moment, but that will hopefully change fairly soon. We're going to go to Australia early next year, see my family and my friends, but also do a lot of sailing around Australia in different catamarans. So yeah, we've got a real busy year ahead of us, and it's all going to be sailing related. So yeah, we're really excited.
There'll be lots to see for sure. Right. Well, you'll have to come on back when you have it. Well, when you're in Australia, you get a hold of me and we'll have you back and we'll chat about what it's like to be on catamarans in Australia, and you can show us some footage.
Great.
Yeah, I'd love to do that.
We'll do it.
Yeah, be excited. Well, thank you guys ever so much, and enjoy Greece while you're there. I'm not sure whether the weather is warm or cold at the moment. Is it warm?
It's beautiful.
It's
It's perfect. Yeah, t-shirt weather outside. It's really
living
nice.
the dream. Living the dream.
Yeah.
Once again, everyone, you've been watching another edition of Yacht Crew Vlogs right here on Yachting International Radio. My name is Rhea. I have been your host. Please tune in again for another episode.